History is written by the victors. But what happens when there is no victory to claim? What happens when a chapter of our past is not rewritten, but simply omitted? We are told the 19th century was an age of progress, of industry, invention, and expansion. But beneath this story of triumph lies a quiet, disturbing anomaly. A silent flood of children. From the 1850s to the late 1920s, an unprecedented number of orphans and foundlings appeared in the cities of the Western world. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. The official narrative tells us this was a tragic but understandable byproduct of the Industrial Revolution. A story of poverty, disease, and the hardships of urban life. It is a simple story. A convenient story, but it is a story that falls apart under the slightest pressure. The numbers do not align. The scale of the response does not match the supposed cause. And the evidence left behind, in the form of colossal institutions and haunting photographs, hints at a far different reality. In this investigation, we will not be exploring a conspiracy theory. We will be examining a paradox, a demographic impossibility hiding in plain sight. We will demonstrate that the orphan crisis of the 19th century was not what we have been told. The evidence suggests it was the aftermath of a vast, unrecorded event. A demographic reset whose consequences have shaped the world we live in today. The story is not in the history books. It is in the numbers. And the numbers do not lie. The evidence begins with what we can see. The archival records of the 19th and early 20th centuries are filled with images that are difficult to reconcile with the official narrative. Look at the photographs. Group after group of children, posed stiffly in front of imposing brick and stone buildings. Their faces are often vacant, their eyes hollow. They are not the smiling, resilient children of charity fundraisers. They look processed, catalogued. There is an unnerving uniformity to their appearance. The same cropped hair, the same ill-fitting clothes. But the true anomaly is not the children themselves. It is the structures built to contain them. These were not mere shelters. They were palaces. Across America and Europe, a specific type of architecture emerged to house these so-called orphans. Look at the New York Foundling Hospital, or the Girard College in Philadelphia, or the Royal Victoria Patriotic Asylum in London. These are not humble dormitories. They are vast, ornate, castellated structures, built with a level of craftsmanship and expense that seems utterly disconnected from their stated purpose. Why would a society, supposedly struggling with widespread poverty, dedicate such immense resources to housing its most disposable members? The scale is bewildering. These buildings could house thousands. They were designed and constructed with a permanence and grandeur usually reserved for cathedrals or seats of government. This is the first contradiction. The visual story does not match the historical one. Then there is the method of their distribution. The orphan trains in America are presented as a quaint, humanitarian effort. But consider the visual reality. Thousands of children, tagged and numbered like luggage, put onto trains and shipped across a continent to unknown futures. The photographs from these events are not heartwarming. They show children lined up on station platforms, being inspected by prospective families like livestock at an auction. This was not charity. This was a system, an efficient, cold, and highly organized logistical operation for the mass redistribution of human beings. What we are looking at is not a series of isolated, local responses to poverty. It is the blueprint of a machine, operating on an industrial scale. The visual evidence shows us a program of immense power, wealth, and organization. So the question becomes, what was its true purpose? To accept the official story, we must accept a series of practical impossibilities. Let us consider the logistics, not as a historical footnote, but as a real-world project management problem. First, the construction. Building one of these colossal orphan asylums was a monumental undertaking. It required millions of bricks, tons of quarried stone, acres of timber, and intricate ironwork. It required armies of skilled laborers, masons, carpenters, architects, and engineers. According to the standard historical model, this was a time when the common man was struggling for subsistence, yet the resources and specialized labor to build dozens of these palace-like institutions across the nation were somehow readily available. Who financed this? The narrative points to philanthropists and church groups. But the sheer scale of this synchronized building boom stretches the concept of private charity to its breaking point. This level of investment, repeated in city after city, nation after nation, suggests a different source of capital. a source with a much deeper, more strategic interest. Next, consider the staffing. An institution housing 2,000 children does not run itself. It requires hundreds of administrators, nurses, cooks, cleaners, teachers, and groundskeepers. It requires a constant, massive supply chain for food, clothing, coal, and medicine. Where did this trained workforce come from, seemingly overnight? How were they paid? How was this immense logistical network established and maintained for decades? The official record is strangely silent on these operational details. It's as if these institutions simply willed themselves into existence, fully staffed and fully funded. And then we have the orphan trains, a marvel of logistical coordination. From 1854 to 1929, the Children's Aid Society and other organizations moved an estimated 250,000 children from the East Coast to the Midwest. This was not a simple train ride. It required negotiating with competing railroad companies for passage. It required agents to travel with the children, and advance agents to arrange their placement. It required a legal framework to handle adoptions and indentures. It required a vast communications network to connect sending and receiving communities. This was a complex, expensive, and sustained operation that lasted for over 75 years. How could a society, allegedly overwhelmed by poverty and social chaos, execute such a sophisticated, long-term plan for population redistribution? The narrative is a paradox. We are asked to believe that the very conditions creating the problem, societal breakdown and poverty, somehow also provided the immense wealth, organization, and manpower needed to create the solution. It is a logical contradiction. A system of this size and efficiency does not arise from chaos. It arises from a plan. When a narrative contains practical impossibilities, we must turn to the official record for clarification. But when we look for detailed explanations of the orphan crisis, we find something deeply unsatisfying. We find vague generalizations, circular reasoning, and a profound lack of primary evidence. The official causes cited are always the same: the Industrial Revolution, immigration, urban poverty, and diseases like tuberculosis and cholera. These are treated as self-evident truths. But they are merely categories, not explanations. They fail to answer the most critical question: where are the records for the parents? If millions of children were orphaned by disease, there should be a corresponding spike of millions of adult death certificates in the municipal records of cities like New York, Boston, and London. Historians point to poor record-keeping, but this is an insufficient excuse. The state was capable of conducting a national census, collecting taxes, and keeping detailed property deeds. Yet, the specific records that would prove the parentage and subsequent orphaning of these children are disproportionately missing. Many children who entered these institutions were classified as foundlings. This term implies they were abandoned, their origins unknown. But the sheer number of foundlings is a statistical anomaly in itself. Did millions of parents, in a single historical period, simultaneously decide to abandon their children on church steps? It defies belief. It suggests that foundling may have been a convenient administrative category for a child whose history was not meant to be known. When we examine the personal histories that do exist for these children, we find another strange pattern. The stories are often repetitive, almost formulaic. Father died in a factory accident, mother died of consumption. Parents were poor immigrants who couldn't cope. While certainly true for some, the repetition of these narratives across tens of thousands of cases begins to feel less like individual history and more like a standardized intake template. It is a story created to fill a vacuum. The official explanation fails because it avoids the difficult questions. It presents a conclusion: a massive number of parentless children, without providing the necessary evidence to support its premise. It relies on the assumption that the 19th century was simply a brutal, chaotic time. But chaos does not produce highly organized, palace-like institutions and a continental child distribution network. Order does. The failure of the official story is not in its description of 19th century hardship, but in its refusal to acknowledge that the scale of the orphan phenomenon requires a cause far greater, and far more specific, than mere poverty. If this phenomenon were unique to the United States, it might be explained away as a peculiar consequence of the American experience, of rapid expansion and immigration. But it was not. When we zoom out, we see the same anomaly appearing with remarkable synchronicity across the entire Western world. The pattern is too consistent to be a coincidence. In Great Britain, the Victorian era saw the rise of the industrial workhouse, which quickly became filled with an astonishing number of children. Organizations like Barnardo's gathered tens of thousands of destitute children from the streets of London and other cities. And just like in America, they did not simply house them. They redistributed them. Through child migration schemes, over 100,000 children, known as home children, were shipped from Britain to Canada, Australia, and other parts of the empire to provide labor and populate the colonies. The stated reasons were the same: poverty, disease, parental death. The methods were the same: mass institutionalization followed by mass relocation. Look to continental Europe, and you find the same model. France, Germany, and Italy all saw a boom in the construction of massive, state-sponsored or church-run orphanages during the same period. The architecture is often strikingly similar, grand, imposing, and built to last for centuries. The story is always the same: a sudden, inexplicable surge in the number of parentless children, followed by a highly organized, state-level response focused on containment and redistribution. Why did this happen everywhere at once? The Industrial Revolution did not occur in all these nations at the exact same pace or in the exact same way. Local conditions varied immensely. Yet, the outcome, a massive surplus of children requiring a new, industrial-scale system of management, was nearly universal. This global pattern suggests a single, underlying cause. A shock to the system that was not localized to New York or London, but was felt across the entire developed world. This was not a collection of independent national crises. It was a single, global event, whose most visible symptom was the sudden appearance of millions of children without a past. The orphanages, the workhouses, and the child migration schemes were not isolated charitable efforts. They were the standardized, international response to a problem whose origins have been quietly erased from our collective memory. To find the cause, we cannot look at one nation's history. We must look for a crack in the history of the world. Let us move away from historical interpretation and turn to simple, cold arithmetic. The narrative we are given is a story. The numbers are data, and the data does not support the story. Let's take the American Orphan Trains as a conservative case study. The program moved approximately 250,000 children. This was just one of many programs, run by just one of many organizations, in just one country. The total number of institutionalized children during this period was certainly in the millions globally. But let's stay with the 250,000. Where did they come from? The US population in 1870 was roughly 38 million. Let's assume these children were drawn primarily from the populations of the major East Coast cities. This still represents a staggering percentage of the child population. To generate this number of true orphans, a huge number of parents would have had to die. Let us be generous and assume a high mortality rate. Let's say a cholera epidemic sweeps through a city. It kills adults, but it does not operate with surgical precision. It also kills children. It does not neatly leave behind only healthy, parentless children ready for transport. For every child left an orphan, many more would have perished alongside their parents. The numbers required to produce such a clean surplus of orphans are astronomically high. But the most significant logical failure is the breakdown of the family unit. In any traditional society, even a poor one, the extended family is the primary social safety net. If a child's parents died, they would be taken in by grandparents, aunts, uncles, or cousins. For the state to have to intervene on this scale, it means that not just the parents were gone, but the entire extended family structure had simultaneously vanished for millions of children. Did entire family trees get wiped out, over and over again, all across the Western world? It's a demographic impossibility. This wasn't a case of families being unable to afford another mouth to feed. The records show children being taken from single parents, or from families deemed unfit with little due process. The system was not just absorbing orphans, it was creating them. Let's perform a thought experiment. Imagine what it would take today, with our population of over 330 million in the US, to generate a proportional crisis. It would mean millions upon millions of children suddenly becoming parentless and without any next of kin. It would be a societal collapse so total that it would be the defining event of our time. No one would forget it. Yet we are asked to believe that an event of proportional magnitude occurred in the 19th century, and it has been relegated to a quaint historical footnote about charity. The logic simply fails. The equation does not balance. The number of orphans is the result. The official causes, poverty and disease, are the variables. But the variables are too small to produce the result. There is a missing term in the equation. A catastrophic event that would have been required to produce so many children, so completely severed from their past. When the existing explanation fails every logical test, we are obligated to form a new hypothesis based on the available evidence. Let us set aside fantasy and speculation, and construct the most controlled, rational explanation for the facts we have observed. The facts are a sudden, massive, and international appearance of parentless children, the simultaneous construction of enormous, expensive institutions to house them, and the existence of a highly organized system for their redistribution. A simple charitable response to poverty does not fit these facts. A planned, systemic response to a major demographic event does. Let us propose this hypothesis. In the 19th century, the Western world experienced a major, unrecorded, or deliberately obscured population collapse. We do not need to invent a cause. It could have been a series of interconnected events, a pandemic far more virulent than the history books tell us, a period of extreme climate events and subsequent famine, or a widespread, violent conflict that has been sanitized from the record. Or perhaps a combination of all three. Such an event would not just kill people, it would shatter the social fabric. It would break down communities, erase family lines, and leave behind a generation of survivors with no connection to the past. The children we see in these photographs were not orphans in the way we understand the term. They were the survivors. They were the raw material for rebuilding a society. In this context, the giant institutions were not orphanages. They were processing centers. Their purpose was not to shelter, but to indoctrinate. To take these children, sever any remaining ties to their origins, and remold them into citizens for a new world. This explains the missing records. Their pasts were intentionally erased. It explains the uniformity of their dress and education. They were being standardized. And it explains the orphan trains and child migration schemes. These were not rescue missions. They were a workforce and population distribution system. They were a tool to repopulate empty or strategically important areas with a new generation that had no memory of what came before. This hypothesis resolves the contradictions. It explains the funding and scale of the institutions. They were a critical state-level infrastructure project. It explains the logistics. It was a planned repopulation, not a chaotic relief effort. And it explains the numbers. A true demographic cataclysm is the only input that can logically produce an output of millions of unattached children. This is a disturbing thought, but it aligns with the evidence in a way the official story simply does not. We are looking at the aftermath of a great forgetting. We have examined a fracture in our official history. We have seen the visual evidence of a system too vast to be simple charity. We have analyzed the practical impossibilities of its creation and operation under the accepted narrative. We have watched the official story fail to provide adequate evidence or logical consistency. We have observed a global pattern that points not to local crises, but to a single, worldwide event. And we have looked at the hard logic of the numbers, which demand a cause far greater than the one we have been given. The conclusion is not a comfortable one. The evidence does not point to a simple story of industrial-era poverty. It points to a managed, systemic response to a demographic catastrophe. An event that has been so thoroughly scrubbed from the record that its only remaining traces are the silent faces of millions of children, and the colossal, empty buildings that once processed them. We do not claim to have the final answer. We present only the evidence and the profound questions it raises. What truly happened in the 19th century to create a world full of orphans? Why was a system of such immense scale and complexity created to manage them? And what does it mean if our understanding of the recent past is built upon a foundation of missing history? The clues are not buried in a secret vault. They are in our own towns. The old stone building that was once the city orphan asylum. The local histories that speak of repopulating the county with children from the east. The census records that show a sudden influx of new families with no local roots. The past is never truly gone. It is simply waiting to be examined with fresh eyes. The questions are there for anyone willing to ask them. If you believe these questions are important, that the inconsistencies in our history deserve investigation, then the work is just beginning. The archives are open.